A courtroom filled with prejudice. A bored judge who just wanted to get the case over with so he could play golf. A complacent prosecutor who believed it would be an easy win. And a 19-year-old boy, Nathan Carter, sitting there, framed for a car theft he didn't commit. Everyone had already decided he was guilty. No one cared about the truth. But when the world turned its back on him, Nathan didn't give up. He didn't plead guilty just to get a reduced sentence. He didn't let fear stifle his voice. He stood up, confronting a system that was ready to crush him. What did they have? Fingerprints on the stolen car. A police officer who claimed to have seen him driving away. A witness ready to testify. But what did Nathan have? The truth. He confronted the prosecutor, exposed false testimony. He forced the system to confront its own flaws. And when the dark secrets of this case are revealed, the whole courtroom falls silent in shock. But will the truth be strong enough to prevail? Or will he be crushed by the very justice he is trying to protect? A story of courage, of injustice, and of a young man's journey from innocent defendant to a warrior for justice. Are you ready to step into this trial? Subscribe to Black Footprints now to not miss out on dramatic and meaningful stories. Nathan Carter sat on the dock, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He felt the contemptuous gaze of the courtroom pressing down on him, as if everyone had already pronounced a sentence before the trial had even begun. They saw him not as a person, but as a criminal who deserved no pardon. Judge Harold Whitmore, a grizzled man with a cold expression, flipped through the case file, barely concealing his boredom. There's nothing complicated about this, his eyes seemed to say. He had handled hundreds of similar cases, another street kid, another stolen car, another wasted life. On the other side, District Attorney Gregory Fallon stood, a smug smile on his lips. He saw Nathan not as a person, but as an easy career goal. To Fallon, this was a case too simple to fail. A dark-skinned young man from a poor neighborhood, caught at the scene with a stolen car. What was there to argue about? Fallon walked slowly toward the jury, his voice deep but sharp as a knife. Gentlemen, we are talking about a car theft in broad daylight and an unmistakable act of resisting police. The defendant was found at the scene. The car door was open, and when the police approached, he tried to run away. He turned to Nathan, his eyes defiant. This was not an innocent mistake. This was a deliberate act. Nathan gritted his teeth. Every word Fallon said was a knife to his pride. But he couldn't argue. He couldn't speak. The only person in the room who believed in his innocence was his mother, Angela Carter. She sat in the back row, her hands clasped together in a trembling fist. Her brown hair was streaked with gray, a reminder of the stress and sleeplessness she had endured over her son. She had been a brilliant paralegal, one who knew the legal system better than anyone. But right now she was just a mother who was watching helplessly as her son was framed for a crime he did not commit. Fallon turned back to her desk, flipped through the files in front of her, and spoke in a patronizing tone. I'll make it simple. We can offer a plea deal. If the defendant agrees to plead guilty, he can serve only a year in prison instead of facing a more serious sentence. The courtroom fell silent for a moment. Eyes turned to Nathan. He could plead guilty. A year in prison might not be so bad compared to what he would face if convicted. But no, he wouldn't. He couldn't plead guilty to a crime he did not commit. Nathan raised his head, his eyes fixed on Fallon. No, his voice was low, but clear and decisive. Fallon raised his eyebrows, as if he had just turned down a golden opportunity. Are you sure? Think carefully, Carter. This is the best option you have. Nathan swallowed, but his eyes did not waver. I plead not guilty because I did not do it. A murmur spread through the room. Some shook their heads, others chuckled. Judge Whitmore sighed, flipped another page of the file, and rapped his gavel on the table. Then we will let the jury decide. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. He had no idea what lay ahead. But one thing was certain. He would not bow to a charge he did not commit. Prosecutor Gregory Fallon straightened his tie, walking slowly toward the jury with confidence. He had done this hundreds of times, painting a clear picture of guilt, leaving no room for doubt. Ladies and gentlemen, Fallon began, his voice strong but firm. Today we are not talking about a case of mistaken identity, but a case of intentionality. The defendant Nathan Carter stole a silver Audi A6 from a parking lot on Sunset Boulevard at 10:37 p.m. He was later spotted by police trying to flee. And most importantly, the evidence is right here. He turned back to the prosecutor's table, picked up a folder, and looked directly at the jury. We have the defendant's fingerprints on the steering wheel. He tapped the folder, emphasizing each word. Not only that, Officer Daniel Brooks, a veteran of over a decade, saw the defendant behind the wheel as the car sped away. The courtroom erupted in an uproar. A few people nodded, as if the case had already been settled. Who could argue with a police officer and fingerprints on a stolen car? Nathan didn't react. He just sat there, watching Fallon's every move. He knew he was innocent, but it felt like the world had turned against him. In the judge's chair, Harold Whitmore glanced at his watch. He leaned his elbows on the table and sighed. Prosecutor Fallon, I hope you can wrap this up before lunch. I have a round of golf this afternoon, and honestly, this case doesn't seem too complicated. A few laughs came from the audience. Fallon smiled, too, as if this were just a formality before he added another victory to his record. But then he paused, squinting as if he had just remembered something. He pretended to consider, then spoke with undisguised interest. Oh, and just to be clear, I'd like to call a witness. Someone who saw the defendant near the car just before it was stolen. The courtroom door opened, and a man entered. He was tall and thin, wearing an old gray coat, his eyes darting as he assessed everyone in the room. Nathan Carter, Fallon said, turning to the defendant with a triumphant smile. Do you recognize this man? Nathan squinted at the man, and then his heart sank. He had never been at the scene. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. This was not a real witness. This was the card Fallon had just pulled out to wrap up the case neatly. But Fallon didn't know one thing. Nathan was there, and he knew for a fact that the man was lying. Nathan clenched his fists on the arms of his chair, feeling his blood boil. He had been silent for too long. As Fallon waved his hand at his false witness, and his public defender shuffled through his papers, unsure of how to respond, Nathan knew he couldn't let things go on like this. He stood up. I will defend myself, sir. The courtroom fell silent for a moment. Then, laughter broke out. A few people in the audience shook their heads in frustration. A man accused of car theft thought he could defend himself? How ridiculous! Fallon sneered, folding his arms as if he had just been given a surprise gift. Oh, this is going to be interesting. He turned to the jury, amusement evident on his face. I think we should let Mr. Carter show off a little, don't you? Judge Whitmore raised an eyebrow, flipping through the file in front of him with a bored expression. Are you sure, Carter? The legal system isn't like a game show where you can stand up and make a speech. But Nathan was unmoved. He looked straight at the judge, his voice firm. I know that, Your Honor. But I also know that if I don't defend myself, no one else will. From the back row, Angela Carter shook her head, her eyes filled with worry. She couldn't stop herself from standing up. Nathan, you can't do that. Get a good lawyer for you. I know you can find someone. Nathan turned to look at his mother, and for a moment, all the noise in the courtroom faded away. He saw the pain in her eyes, the pain of a mother who tried to protect her son from this unjust world, but in the end couldn't keep him from falling into this. He took a deep breath, his voice softer but still determined. Mom, I spent my childhood learning about the law from you. Every night, when you sat reading case files, I listened. When you fought for the voiceless, I learned how they stood up for themselves. I'm not just a street kid. I'm your son, and I know I can do this. Angela's eyes were glistening with tears. She wanted to believe her son, but she also knew the harsh realities of the system. Not everyone who spoke the truth was heard. But she also knew Nathan's character. Once he made up his mind, nothing could change it. Judge Whitmore sighed, tapping his gavel on the table. Okay, if Mr. Carter wants to defend himself, I won't stop him. But you know, this could make things worse for you. Nathan turned to face Fallon. He wasn't afraid. He had been waiting for this moment, the chance to reveal the truth. Well then, Fallon said, the corners of his lips turning up. Let's see what you can do. Nathan stepped into the center of the courtroom, facing Fallon, his eyes shining with a confidence no one had ever known him to possess. Fallon remained smug, but something in the air began to shift. a quiet unease creeping among the jurors. Nathan looked directly at the prosecutor, his voice clear, each word emphasized with absolute certainty. "Mr. Fallon, you said that Officer Daniel Brooks saw me drive the Audi A6 away from the scene, right?" Fallon folded his arms, nodding without hesitation. "Exactly. And that's a credible testimony from a police officer with over a decade of experience." Nathan tilted his head slightly, as if thinking. Then, surely it wouldn't be wrong to check the GPS data of his police car at the time, right? The courtroom fell silent. Fallon blinked, losing her usual composure for the first time. GPS data? Nathan took a step toward the prosecutor's desk. That's right. Every patrol car is equipped with GPS, recording its exact location at a specific time. If Officer Brooks was actually at the scene when the burglary occurred, this data would prove his story correct. Fallon looked down at the file on the desk, then back up at Nathan. His hesitation did not escape anyone. Behind him, Angela Carter held her breath. She knew her son was smart, but she did not expect him to be this sharp. Judge Whitmore, who had originally wanted to end this case quickly, suddenly became more serious. He leaned his elbows on the desk, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Fallon, I think this is a reasonable request. Can the prosecutor provide Officer Brooks' GPS data?" Fallon hesitated for a second, then tried to regain control. "Sure, sir." He motioned for his assistant to check the data. A minute passed. 2. The courtroom began to murmur. Fallon shuffled through papers, while his assistant whispered something in his ear. Fallon's expression changed, from confusion to tension to anger. Nathan folded his arms, waiting. Finally, Fallon was forced to admit, "Your Honor, the GPS data shows that Officer Brooks's vehicle was not at the scene at the time of the incident." A shockwave swept through the courtroom. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Several jurors exchanged incredulous glances. If Officer Brooks wasn't there, how could he have seen Nathan drive away? Judge Whitmore frowned, looking genuinely interested in the case for the first time. He rapped his gavel on the table. Quiet. But no matter how much he tried to impose control, the truth could not be ignored. Nathan looked at Fallon, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Looks like we've discovered a big problem, huh?" Nathan took a step forward, feeling the change in the atmosphere of the courtroom. There was a murmur among the jury, no longer contempt or certainty of his guilt, but doubt. And he knew he had to push that doubt further. He turned, looking directly at the jury. "Prosecutor Fallon said that my fingerprints on the steering wheel were incontrovertible evidence that I was the thief. But I want to ask you a question." He paused, giving them time to concentrate. "If you went into a clothing store, tried on a coat, and put it back on the shelf, but an hour later, someone stole the coat, would you be charged with theft?" A few of the jurors blinked, and some leaned back, silently contemplating. Nathan continued, his voice stronger and more confident. "So why would my fingerprints on the steering wheel be considered conclusive evidence that I stole the car? If I had touched it before? If I had been around for some other reason?" He paused, then turned to Fallon. "Prosecutor Fallon, I want to ask, did you bring in a forensic expert to prove that my fingerprints were conclusive evidence?" Fallon stiffened. The certainty he had once had in his voice seemed to be fading. "The fingerprints are in the investigation file, and non tan interruptive. You don't have anyone to verify them, do you? No one here to testify that my fingerprints are conclusive evidence." The room fell silent. Fallon looked down at the documents in front of him, his lips pressed together. Nathan knew this was the moment to strike. He walked over to the defense desk, taking out a document he had received from his public defender. And that's not all. He held up the paper. According to the forensic records, the police did not conduct proper testing. There is no record of anyone else's fingerprints being checked, only mine. Angela Carter put her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. Several of the jurors turned to look at each other. Nathan took a deep breath, his eyes shining with determination. "There is even evidence that the fingerprint data may have been altered. So I ask you, was this a fair investigation, or was it an attempt to target me?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The jury no longer saw Nathan as a criminal, but as someone being trampled by the very system that was supposed to protect him. Fallon tried to take control. This is just baseless speculation. The legal system cannot be swayed by emotional stories. But Judge Whitmore banged his gavel on the table, his eyes now serious. I agree that we need to verify this. If the data was altered or the process was not followed properly, then this charge cannot stand. Nathan looked at Fallon, a smile playing on his lips. It seems this case is not as simple as you think, is it? Nathan knew this was the moment. He took a deep breath, clutching the file he had held throughout the trial. Fallon could manipulate the evidence. He could make sharp accusations, but he couldn't change the truth. And now, Nathan would lay that truth before the entire courtroom. He stepped forward, his voice calm but resonant. Your Honor, I have an important document for you to review. The room fell silent. Fallon's eyes narrowed, his hands clenching into fists. Judge Whitmore raised his eyebrows, looking impatient. Nathan held up a file, then looked directly at the jury. This is a copy of the initial report from the owner, Mr. Jonathan Reed, the owner of the Audi A6. He paused for a moment to let the information sink in. No one spoke. In his initial statement, Mr. Reed told the police that the perpetrator was a white male. Murmurs broke out immediately. Several of the jury members turned to look at each other, eyes wide with shock. Angela Carter held her breath, and Fallon, he turned white. Nathan continued, his voice growing stronger. And yet, somehow, this information was not included in the case file. Instead, I was arrested as soon as the police found me near the car, without any attempt to verify Mr. Reed's initial statement. He turned to Fallon, his eyes challenging. Can you explain why such important testimony was missing, Mr. Fallon? Fallon froze, trying to hide his confusion. This evidence has not been verified. It could simply be an administrative error. Nathan smiled coldly. Administrative error? A clear statement about the identity of the perpetrator was accidentally overlooked. Judge Whitmore leaned his elbows on the table, flipping through the documents Nathan had just presented. The disdain he had shown had vanished from his face, replaced by a seriousness he had never seen before. Prosecutor Fallon, he said, his voice low, why isn't this testimony in the record? Fallon tried to compose himself, but his earlier complacency was gone. Maybe it was just a mistake in the investigation. Mistakes, Nathan repeated, his voice sharp. Or maybe a cover-up? The courtroom erupted. The murmurs had gone from scattered chatter to a wave of outrage. Some of the jurors began exchanging solemn glances. But there was one person who wasn't surprised, Angela Carter. She looked at her son with pride in her eyes. Last night, as she quietly dug into the police files, she found this document. A piece of evidence that had been hidden, a truth that had almost been buried forever. She had stayed up all night, turning the pages, and when she found it, she knew it would be her son's most important weapon. Nathan took a breath, then turned to face the judge. Your Honor, this legal system was supposed to protect me, but instead it tried to twist the truth to convict me. You can see clearly now I am not a thief. Judge Whitmore was silent for a moment, then slammed his gavel down on the table. The court is adjourned. We need to review the entire case. The courtroom erupted. Fallon knew he had lost. Nathan had not just defended himself. He had exposed a conspiracy. And for the first time since entering the courtroom, he felt something he had not felt in days. Hope. The courtroom, normally an arena where justice sometimes went awry, was now filled with a heavy silence. A minute ago, Prosecutor Fallon had been in control. Now he just stood there, shoulders tense, eyes flickering between the documents in front of him as if searching for a way out. But there was no way out. No more excuses. No more sharp arguments. No more the authority of a prosecutor who was confident he was always right. Fallon swallowed, but said nothing. His entire life had been built on control, and today he had let a 19-year-old boy destroy it all. Nathan stood in the center of the courtroom, unfazed, unwavering. His gaze never left Fallon, not with arrogance or gloating, but with determination. You came into this room a criminal, but you will leave this room a free man. And now all eyes turned to Judge Harold Whitmore. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at Nathan, but it wasn't the contemptuous look he had before. It was thoughtful. He had been a judge for 20 years. He had seen hundreds, thousands of cases. He had seen countless young faces enter this courtroom as convicted criminals before the trial had even begun. And Nathan Carter had thought he was just another case, a street kid, a young man who had committed a crime, another name on the long list of people society wanted to forget. But now he wasn't so sure. He took a deep breath and picked up the gavel from the table. The weight of it in his hand was like the weight of his responsibility. He glanced at the jury, some nodding, some still stunned, but all seeing the truth. He turned to Fallon, his old eyes sharper than ever. "Prosecutor Fallon, is there anything else you would like to say?" Fallon opened his mouth, but no words came out. He knew he had lost, and for the first time, he had no way to hide the truth. Whitmore turned to look at Nathan one last time, as if taking stock of him. And then he sighed. "The case is dismissed. Nathan Carter is found not guilty." The gavel echoed through the courtroom, but could not drown out the explosion of reactions that followed. Some gasped, others whispered, but in the midst of all the chaos, only one person burst into tears: Angela Carter. She rushed toward her son, her arms shaking as she hugged him. "Son," her voice broke, the tears she had been holding back for days finally spilling over. She couldn't say anything more. There were no words to describe what she felt. She only held her son tightly, as if she never wanted to let him go again. Nathan held his mother tightly, his eyes red. "Mom, I told you. I won't let them destroy me." Whitmore remained seated on the bench, watching the scene before him. In that moment, he realized that the system he had devoted his life to had a crack big enough that an innocent boy had almost been crushed under it. And it was he, his prejudice, who had almost caused that to happen. He put the gavel down on the table, then shook his head slightly. Maybe it was time for him to look at himself. Nathan walked out of the courthouse into the bright Los Angeles afternoon sun. No longer a convicted man, but a free man. But he was not alone. He walked through a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing, questions flying. "Nathan, how does it feel to be a professional prosecutor? Do you think this is a major turning point for justice? What are you going to do next?" Nathan paused, his gaze calmly scanning each face, waiting for a sensational answer. He felt no joy, no sense of personal victory. And then, in a calm but forceful voice, he simply said, "I did not win. Justice won." The crowd was silent for a moment. And then, the cameras continued to flash, the reporters murmuring the words as if trying to memorize them for tomorrow morning's front page. Angela Carter, the woman who had fought tirelessly for her son, walked up to Nathan. She said nothing, but opened her arms and pulled him into a tight hug. "You made me proud, Nathan." Her voice was tight, but there was joy, relief, and a hope that she had long thought she had lost. Nathan squeezed his mother's hand. "I was only doing what you taught me. The truth is always more important than anything else." From a distance, standing on the steps of the courthouse, Judge Harold Whitmore watched him silently. His old eyes no longer held the arrogance, the contempt that had held Nathan when he first walked into court. Now, they held something else: respect. Nathan Carter had not just defended himself. He had forced the system to face the truth. A few days later, Nathan sat in his small apartment, the morning light filtering through the windows. He opened the mailbox, skimmed through a few advertisements, and then stopped. A cream-colored envelope, stamped with the Harvard Law School seal. His heart pounded. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the neatly printed words on the page. "We are impressed by your tenacity and your ability to argue. We believe you have the potential to make a real difference in the legal field. We are pleased to invite you to Harvard Law School." Nathan sat there, staring at the letter in his hand. He had thought his life was over when he was convicted. But now, a new path was opening before him, a path he had never dared to consider. He smiled slightly, then stood up, his eyes looking out at the distant sky. A different courtroom, a completely different place, but the tension was just as intense as the last time Nathan stood in the dock. But this time, he was not the defendant. Nathan Carter, now an adult, walked into the courtroom in a perfect black suit, briefcase in hand. He walked toward the defense table, eyes full of confidence. The judge banged his gavel. "Let us begin the trial." Nathan took a deep breath, then looked directly at the prosecutor across from him. A small smile crossed his lips. He was no longer the misunderstood boy from years ago. He was a lawyer now, and he would fight for justice, not just for himself, but for all who needed it.